right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fourth episode of Grief. Let's talk about it. And today we have a very diverse panel. And today our topic is going to be being happy without guilt after a loss. So today, I want to introduce the panel. So, panel, if you guys could just take a few seconds and just introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I'm Mike Overly, and I am an energy healer, author, and men's coach, and I work with men and their dogs to help create an exceptional life no matter what.
Awesome. Dee?
Yeah, I'm Dee. I have an Unplugged Grief Ministries where I help people with grief, and I use life and mental health coaching that will help them through that, whatever difficulty of their grief. So,
Alexandra.
I'm Alexandra. I'm working from the Netherlands. My business is called Cup of Grief. I work with people in grief, and I see grief as a journey, a process of healing. And I'm a specialist in masculine and instrumental grief.
All right. Dorothy.
We are Worldwide Dragon Shooting Day, and we impact the world one arrow at a time. We do grief therapy through archery, and we try to do grief a little bit differently.
Awesome. Mark?
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Shutter. I am the recently published author of the memoir, Cowboys Are Not Supposed to Cry, about my own grief experience, and I am currently launching the Job 213 project, where we come alongside and support others on their journey of grief.
Awesome. Bill?
Thanks, Tony. I'm Bill Ratner, and I'm an author and voice actor, and I run a workshop called Writing Down the Grief.
Awesome. And I am Tony Lynch. I am your host, and I'm also the founder of Members of Us, where we offer grief support for men. And so today is a really good topic, and I think a lot of people struggle with that. And it's being happy without guilt after loss. And I know one of the things that always happens when we're happy, grief comes in waves. So, you got to sometimes you got to take the good with the bad, but sometimes when the good comes in, we feel guilty because the person that we want to be happy with is not there. All right, let's start this discussion. Anybody want to start?
well, I had an incident that happened recently that put me, even as a grief coach, that put me into feeling guilty. A friend of mine who I've known for over 40 years, his wife died a couple of years ago, cancer, and he seemed to be acting like he was doing okay, he's happy and everything. And I thought, wow, he's this man who just lost his wife of over 40 years, and he's acting like nothing is wrong. And then he committed suicide. So that part of me, I sort of feel a little bit guilty because as a grief coach and as his friend, I didn't reach out because I really thought he was okay. And I realized after he had died that he wasn't. So I had to find a happy place that he's resting, and he's in the place when he's with his wife. But at the same time, as a grief coach, I feel a little bit guilty because I did not reach out to him like I should have.
Now, anybody else? Because I know for myself, when I lost my son, when holidays came around, there was a side of me that wanted to be happy with other people, But then there was a side of me that always felt guilty because he wasn't there, and I didn't want people to think that he was forgotten or anything like that, So it was a mixed array of feelings. But the most prominent one was always guilt, because I didn't know that it was okay for me to be happy.
Guilt is often something that has to do with loyalty, doesn't it? In grief.
In a
You
lot of ways.
feel like they can't be happy, they can't have fun, so why should I? It feels like if you have fun, you are disloyal to them.
Yes.
I think that's one of the main reasons why people feel guilt.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, all those memories of all that stuff of my past, especially when Timothy was still alive. And all of a sudden, all of that guilt just, I'm like, stop. But I began to realize that was stuff that I just did not talk about with other people. And now I'm sharing all those memories on paper. So some of that guilt is pouring out. I'm like, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I was like that, you know? But then I look at it as a positive thing. I said, but you know what? You learned a lot from all those little mistakes you made, even the mistakes you made with Timothy. That was your learning curve to help you become a better person. And that's how I am able to find my happy place. Because I had to find a way to turn those bad memories around to help me become a better person. I hope that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to piggyback off of there? Because I know, Mark, you lost your wife, correct?
Correct.
You know,
Yeah.
go ahead.
What I was going to say is, because I thought about this a lot, and it's like, we associate the word guilt, and the definition of guilt is usually doing something wrong. We're guilty of doing something wrong, whether it's intentional or not intentional. And a lot of times I think the guilt we place on ourselves, at least in my own case, was not that I did anything wrong, but I still felt guilty about things I didn't do or things I could have done, things I thought I could have done better, and realizing over the years, and especially in the last 5 years, as I've really worked on my healing, is that's a false guilt in a lot of ways. It's not a true guilt. There's no guilt. There shouldn't be any guilt attached to that. We're all doing the best we can at the time of life we're in, where we're at, and that's the best we can do a lot of times. And giving ourselves grace. We talk about giving others grace in this life, but a lot of times we don't give ourselves grace.
Yeah.
So, and I did that for a lot of years, not giving myself any grace.
It's very interesting what with children. The classic is a child of divorce, he blames himself, or a parent dies, the child blames himself. And but what about the adult? Does the adult still do what the child does? My parents both died of natural causes before I turned 14, and I still have dreams, not nightmares, but dreams where I have messed up so badly I've forgotten my lines. I'm in a TV show or something, and I'm not a television actor, but I get a big role in a huge network sitcom, and show up, and they're filming, and there are hundreds of people there, and I haven't even started to memorize my lines, and everybody's just so disappointed. And I know that all that stuff, it comes from the child who feels guilty, responsible for what went wrong. And my question is, Mark, what you just said, it sounds like we still do that as adults.
I would totally agree with that, Bill. I know one of the things, sharing, I guess, kind of freely that I worked through with my therapist was the fact that I felt like for a lot of years that I missed something. There was something I missed that could have kept my wife alive. She died of cancer. Nothing I could have done could have prevented that. But I went after her death for years thinking there was something I missed, and that comes from a young man, 28 years old, who is supposed to be capable, supposed to be able to take care of things, supposed to, be able to handle things. And exactly what you said, this little boy rose up inside of me that I was like, I couldn't fix this. There was no way to fix this. And so I blamed myself for not being enough of a man and all those sorts of things over the years of what did I miss, sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of truth in what you said, Bill. Absolutely.
Anybody else want to piggyback off of that? I think that's interesting. Having the boy inside of you feel that way, or the child, as Bill mentioned, the child inside of you. There's a lot of that, that I had to address, as I got older, because I didn't, most of the times we don't know, right, until we're thrust into a situation to where. Prime example, holidays come around. I have friends who have kids, and I love those kids to death. Don't get me wrong. And those kids have been around since I had my son. And when my son passed away, I still wanted to go to the store and buy him presents, but I struggled with it because I was going, what would my son think? If he's not here, I'm not getting him a present. So it was that grief brain that I was going through as well. And I carried that guilt every time I picked up a present. I always went, man, I wonder, I can't give my son this. And I feel guilty for giving this to another child, even though deep down inside, I want to. And so I struggle with finding that happy medium as I went.
Tony, do you do something for his birthday?
To be honest with you, I stopped celebrating a lot of holidays, a lot of birthdays after. I'm still working on it. So I'm still a work in progress. And I realize that. So I don't do things that I normally would do because, there's a side of me that still wants him, that wants him here. And I still want him here, but I do want him here. We used to go to Applebee's and Chuck E. Cheese. That's what we did for his birthday. And that was our day. That was me and his day. We go, we start off the day, we go play with his friends, play dates, right? Beautiful. Then we go to movies. We'll go see a movie of his choice. We would go, after that, go have dinner. We would go Chuck E. Cheese and finish off the night, playing games and things like that. And so when he passed away, I didn't know if that was okay anymore. I always felt guilty. So I started, taking little steps and going there and going to these places just to see other people doing it, because it brought me joy to see other people happy. But it also, there was that guilty feeling that I always carried with me of, he's not here. What am I doing?
Because what I do for Tim's birthday is I just get him a cake. And my dog, Lizzie, and I, we just celebrate his birthday privately, but we still get him his cake. And that way, in a sense, I'm feeling happy that I'm doing something in his memory. And I don't have to feel guilty about forgetting his birthday.
Yeah.
So every year we enjoy a carrot cake.
Okay.
And I have them right on there, happy birthday, Tim. So that way, I get a picture of it. So for 8 years, I remember he died a month before his birthday, and I still went and got him a cake. And and balloons, and that was his first birthday. And I still did something because it was supposed to be his 25th birthday. And I don't think I wanted to feel guilty of not doing something, but I think as a mother, you have that motherly instinct that you want to do something for your child, no matter how old they are. And I do that every year just for his birthday. I don't have to worry about going to a movie or a restaurant. I just do it right here in the house. Because I remember on his first birthday at church, a lot of people in my church thought I was going crazy because I had that cake, They did not understand. I think because they just did not understand what it was like to be a parent that lost a child.
Right.
But I didn't want to feel guilty of forgetting his birthday either. So that was where I feel happy. I don't feel guilty. I do something to celebrate Timothy.
I think that's the hardest part for people is doing something to celebrate the persons that we've lost, right? I can't. Anyone else ever struggle with that? Just struggling to do something like that, because I know it's hard. There's a lot of people that are listening right now that are probably first timers going through the holidays. So for those that are out there struggling right now, it's okay to be happy. It's okay to do things that normally would bring you joy. It is. I'm learning that, right? And I think that's the hardest thing that we do is learn that it's okay.
And even if you're celebrating, it's okay to still cry, because it can be a happy cry. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sad cry. But even if it is a sad cry, you're still celebrating. You're still doing something happy. You just wish they were happy. You just wish they were there. So I think that's where the little guilt part comes in. But at the same
Right.
time, I want to stay. I want to stay happy because I'm celebrating Timothy.
Yeah.
You know?
But I think a lot of that goes and comes with the waves of grief as well, right? Because we talked about that earlier before we went live. Those waves of griefs. You know, we're so used to associating grief with sadness.
Yes.
You know, that feels totally normal. So when you do get one of those waves that come in that makes you feel good, we kind of fight it a little bit, right? Like, what is this? Am I supposed to feel this way? And not understanding that it's totally normal to be happy. It is totally normal to want to be happy. So, anybody else want to piggyback off of that?
Yeah, I have experienced my car going 65 miles an hour on the freeway is often the best therapy room, generally by myself. And there are times when I suddenly something will make me cry, and either listening to the radio and I'll turn it off, or a mood I'm in, and tears will come, and I'll say, well, what am I crying about? It's not having lost my child when she was 3 months old. It's not having lost my father to a heart attack. What am I crying about? And there are times when crying just simply feels good. When there is grief, almost a generalized grief that lives in me, that is there.
Yeah.
And I can say to myself, this actually feels good. It's not, I'm not laughing, I'm crying. But I'm as opposed to taking a drink or pushing it down or shouting at the traffic, I'm just letting tears come. And
Yeah.
even though it is grief, and even though it's a generalized grief, and I might not even know what the heck I'm crying about at that moment, it's not a bad feeling. And I don't get nervous searching. Oh, what am I? Oh, I better call somebody. It's okay. Go for it.
It's a release, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's releasing your tears are. My mother always said tears are cleansing the soul, and that's so true. Sometimes I sometimes induce tears by looking at some video or listening to certain music, just to release the pressure of pain or grief or anxiety or whatever is playing up. I think it's a very healthy thing to do.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately not necessarily encouraged, at
Mhm.
least in Western cultures that I know. I have a dear friend who lost her husband 3 years ago, and she's doing fine. She's working. She has friends, but she gets sad, and she has some friends. These are educated people who say, "Oh, come on, honey, it's been 3 years. Get over it."
Mm.
I mean, how are you gonna literally get over losing a partner of 30 some years who you adore? I mean, maybe your life changes and you maybe fall in love again, but there's a natural tendency in our culture to sort of go, "Oh, come on now." I think it just makes people nervous. I think tears make non-criers nervous.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
They feel awkward.
they do. They do. We don't know how to express ourselves in this society in a deep and meaningful way, and for a lot of men, we're actually told to do the opposite. You know, we have to, be the ones that toe the line, show up, be sufficient, be whatever it is, be in this army of one mentality. And so we just keep stuffing it, and we see another guy cry, and we're like, whoa, whoa, hey, that would be really uncomfortable to us, and it was for me forever.
Mhm.
The death of my brother, coming up on 6 years ago, was like this catalyst for this massive change in my life. It literally destroyed me, and what that allowed me to do, though, was to see that I didn't like how I was showing up in the world.
Mm.
So I've been on this amazing journey ever since, and really like learning, like, oh, I have a voice. I can express things. I can say things, and not worry that someone else may not like it. They're not gonna like it. That's okay. But it's okay for me to express what I need to.
Mm.
Mm.
Even if they're uncomfortable with your grief.
Yes. Yeah. Dorothy,
That's
you want to add to that, Dorothy?
It's no, I was just gonna say it's a lot of it's cultural too,
Mhm.
especially with emotions. Um, it is, when my husband died, our son was 7, and my dad said to him, "You're the man of the house now." And I got really upset with him. I'm like, he's 7 years old. He's not the man of the house. It's not his job to take care of me. It's his job to figure out what is his role going to be to himself now, and how is he going to get through this. And to go back to what Bill and Mark were saying before, there is kids really pick up a lot on what are the parents doing and what are they thinking. When we went to a grief group, it was a few months after my husband died, and there was a family there that had lost their son, and it was about a year prior, and they stopped celebrating everything. They didn't celebrate Christmas anymore. They didn't celebrate Thanksgiving. They didn't celebrate anybody's birthdays. They stopped living. And I asked, the counselor after everybody left, I said, how can they do that with the kids? Because now the kids are learning, well, this is what happens when somebody dies. We die too. And I never understood that process of that. And my son asked me when on the way home, he said, why are they doing that? And I'm like, I don't know. We don't know all the circumstances, but this is how they're dealing with it. This is how they're able to go on, and this is what they feel best to do. Whether we think it's right or not, it's not our job to judge them. We're there to support everybody else and we are as well. But yeah, it's as you know, everybody handles their grief differently. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And some people laugh at little things that other people would cry at. I think the main thing is just to let the emotions out and get the emotions out. And don't worry about that person that, somebody asked me, well, how long ago? It's been almost 10 years. And this is going on 5 years. Well, your son should be over it by now, right? I'm like, no, kids really don't even start grieving until probably that second year is when it really, really hits them hard.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge misunderstanding when it comes down to that. Everybody always talks about the first year, right? We all talk about it. And, when you're going through it, you actually think the first year is going to be your hardest year. Not understanding you have so many other years that's going to bring about so many different emotions. It's going to bring about so many different outcomes, situations, and things like that, And so getting that expectation out of the way to allow yourself to sit with your grief without others putting their input in what they think that you should be doing, right? So one of the things, like I said before, I have a hard time celebrating holidays since my son has passed away. My mother's passed away. When you spend so many holidays alone, you kind of think that that's normal, right? Now, on the other side, what I have done, and this brings me great joy, and I mentioned this earlier, I started sending I love yous to people that I know that were going through hard things, right? So I'm still grieving, but I'm doing it with the satisfaction of letting someone else know that someone cares. Hardest thing about most grievers that I've always found is that we go into a really dark place, and we don't want to be bothered with anyone. We don't want to, it's nothing to feel thankful for when you're experiencing that great of a loss, right? Or any sort of a loss. So, but the reminder was, and I was talking to Alexandra and Dee earlier, sending that I love you to them was the biggest thing, because even though I know you're going to a dark place, at least now you can go in with the notion of someone cares. But for me, it takes away the guilt. It takes away the guilt because I can celebrate without the bells and the whistles and servitude to others, right?
What you've done, Tony, what all of us here have done, and probably a lot of folks watching and listening, is doing exactly what you said, even in the smallest way. That if I learn that someone has lost a partner, lost a child, lost a parent, whatever, for some reason, because I've had a lot of loss, it's easier for me to say, directly, I'm so sorry, so and so is gone. And the very act of doing that, I suddenly, I'll get this pride about it. Well, I'm able to do this because blah, blah, blah. But the very act of doing it gives me a sense of relief. There's somebody else out there. I can connect with them. I'm not doing anything for them. I'm simply saying, me too. Hey, I hear you. I see you. How are you? How did he die? How did she die?
Mm-hmm.
And the very act of doing that, and then doing it formally, which all you folks are doing through things that organizations, groups you founded, and so on. But even the smallest thing, even an email, not just for someone, but it's to bring you together with another who's grieving. Somehow there's relief there. There's understanding.
Yes.
There's conscious living there.
Acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I try to tell people who have a family who is grieving about how important it is to talk about their lost beloved during the holidays. And not only about how they died or that they died, but to reminisce and memorize their life, to tell the stories of the joy and the fun and the good things and the skills they had and the special talents they had and how their character was, because that keeps a person alive in memory. And it's so healing when you are in grief and somebody tells a good story about the one you loved and lost. That's so healing. It's far more healing than people saying, I'm so sorry for your loss, because yeah, sure you are. Everybody is. Not denying the fact that they really are sorry for your loss, but it's a platitude, isn't it? But to have someone tell a good story about your loved one who you've lost, that's very healing.
Yeah, Alexandra, I worked with an organization called Our House Grief in Los Angeles, and I volunteered in the public schools. We had 10 one-hour sessions for 10 weeks. And the group of kids that I worked with, they're all 13-year-olds. They'd all lost somebody in the last year, from a grandmother to old age, father of alcoholism, a brother to gunshot wounds. They'd all lost someone within the last year. And the curriculum that we were taught, that had been developed over 25 years, was exactly what you said. Every day, ritualistically, we would start the day with each child naming the person who died, saying how they died, and how they learned of it. And they all did it in a way that really surprised me, which most adults, hang their head. And some of these kids just wanted to tell their story. And the curriculum involved getting them to tell the story of exactly how it happened and how they learned that it happened, over and over and over. And I have no doubt that these 10 children, who I'll never see again, who come from not the luckiest circumstances, none of them, the very fact that they were able to say in front of a group of their peers and a couple of adults, this happened to me. This is who she was. This is how old she was. This is what she was to me. These are the happy moments I had with her. This is how I learned of her death. Repeatedly, these kids are going to be processing grief as adults in a very different way from kids who don't get that chance.
Yeah.
They learn to vocalize it. That's very important too. Yeah. I think that's the main problem with men in grief. Michael, maybe you can acknowledge that too. Mostly men don't have the vocabulary to talk about their grief. They're just missing the words to explain exactly how they feel, and either they shut down or it comes out in anger, which is a good emotion if it puts you in a right state of action. But if it's a stagnating anger, you get very easily depressed. So that's one of the things that I see with men. their need for vocalization and vocabulary when they are in grief.
Yeah, I think that's what happened with my friend Edwin. Um, he hid his grief and he hid his sorrow. So he made everybody think he was okay. You know, he was traveling, he bought a camper, bought a brand new pickup truck, and he was doing all this exciting things. And I'm thinking, in my head, I'm saying, this man is supposed to be grieving. Why is he making all these major decisions? You know, he should be grieving. And I understand people grieve differently.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start making major decisions like buying a camper, buying a brand new pickup truck, and then he started dating really early, and all of a sudden he was engaged, and I'm like, your wife hasn't even been dead for 2 years, and Eddie, what are you doing? And I really wish I had the courage to reach out to him and say, what's going on, Eddie? Because, you know, from my training, you should be grieving. You just lost a wife you've been married to for over 43 years. And I also understand that mental health goes with this. And I'm afraid that what happened is that he hid his grief. He pretended he was okay. And then suddenly he realized he wasn't. And boom, he was gone.
Okay, I'll piggyback off of that for a little bit because I can really understand what you're saying. And when we go out and we make those major purchases and things like that, we're doing it for our own self gratification. We're doing things that makes us happy. It's still grieving. It's still grieving. You know what I'm saying? Most men love hot rods, right? Most men love building cars and things like that. So of course, we go back to the things that are familiar with us. We want something to hold on to distract us of everything else that's going on. So yes, and then you may have an individual, men and women both, who don't like being alone. I've met many adults who have lost spouses and within months start dating and want to get back into a relationship where they're used to having someone there. It's not their fault, you know, and it is nothing to look down on. They just understand what they're needing. They want someone to support them, men and women both. So, and if it works for them, I believe as long as they're taking the necessary steps to ensure their healing during that process, you know, do what works for you. In the same sense, without the guilt. So, like you just said, you looked at this person and said, "Oh man, he's supposed to be grieving." According to whom? Who says he or she is not grieving? They're just going about it in a way to, it looks different from you and I. That's all. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I understand what you're saying, but that does make sense. Mm-hmm. But the fact that suddenly he committed suicide.
And again, it goes right back to what I was just saying. He's grieving in a different way. Most of us are looking for things to hold on to, right? And when we don't take the necessary steps to heal, grief, as we all know, will manifest itself. It will come back out at us. And sometimes men, this is why the rate of men's suicide is so high. We carry that guilt. We want so much things to go back to normal. And when it's not, we don't know, like Alexandra said, we don't know how to communicate. And we're so aggressive in our methods that suicide, our rate of suicide is very, very successful. So yes, I get that, you know, and that's why we're having this discussion today. That guilt can be something that holds us down, that makes us make those bad decisions, even though we've done things on impulse, right? That grief comes back out to get us, you know, and without the necessary step or support, it can get pretty gnarly. So we need to get people in the mindset of getting rid of the guilt and taking a step back, learning how to be patient with yourself, having gratitude with yourself. But most of all, taking care of your mental health, understanding that you may not be in the best of situations. And it's okay to ask for help.
I think that is the hardest thing. That's the difference between the child and the adult. The child can sort of coast. the child automatically has defenses where you either shut down or you I mean, we all know people who are, when they were 14 they were okay, but when they were like 24 they weren't so great, and they were 30 they were worse. And so I finally figured out at my age that the difference between being a child and being an adult is the adult, what you just said, Tony, the adult actually must take a conscious, willful step
Yes.
toward healing. Must, that it doesn't happen automatically. For the child, it can happen temporarily. The child is sort of protected by, his or her own psychology and defenses, where it just goes out of their head and they just survive and get through adolescence and get through young adulthood. And then all of a sudden, as an adult, their head is opening up, and their consciousness is full of guilt and grief and regret and rage and this and that, especially men. And unless you take a conscious, willful step, whatever it is, whether it's to stop drinking or do therapy or start, to take a class in how to breathe or whatever it is, that to the adult, it's kind of up to us, not for the sake of a child, but for our own sake, and for the sake of those around us.
I think that has to do with the ability of children to be magical thinkers. Children have a magical thinking mind for about 9 to 10 years, and then it stops. Then they become realists in some way. The magical thinking has to do with I can fix this if I step on every second stone. If I turn the curb the same way every day, my mother isn't dead when I come home. Those kind of thoughts, children have that very much. And we don't have that as adults. Well, maybe we do, but we know immediately it doesn't work, so we stop doing that. But that's how children cope. And that's why they fall when they become teenagers, because reality hits them really hard. Yeah.
Alexander.
Sorry, go ahead, Dorothy.
No, I'm sorry. Alexander, do you think that kids even know what guilt is?
Oh,
They
yes.
haven't.
Yes. Every child has a conscience, so they know what guilt is. But the problem is they think in their magical thoughts they have influence at situations that they normally don't have influence on. They think they have done something wrong. Like, I forgot to step on the second stone that Thursday, and then my father died, and that's my fault because I missed the stone. That's how they think. So they impose guilt on themselves by explaining a death into their own lives, into their own world of magical thinking.
And Alexander, don't you also think that the child has the sort of natural capacity to just repress the grief as well?
No, they don't repress. Emotions come to the extent you can take them. So children can have emotions to a certain level. Like they can have educated guesses to a certain level. There's only so much they can have. But it's not that they can suppress. They can try and magical things away again, but they don't suppress. No. I've never seen a child suppress things. I have seen children being traumatized to a point where they are numbed and they can't reach their normal level of experiencing things. That's true, but that's not a usual thing. That's a traumatized child. That's different. And it's not said that every child who has experienced the death of a loved one is traumatized. It's a heavy situation, it's a heavy loss, but it's not always traumatizing.
So my brother witnessed my mother's murder.
That will be traumatizing.
So the sad thing is, it was his father that killed our mother.
Yeah.
But
So, yeah.
he had night terrors, even through his adult, and his wife couldn't figure out what was going on because he didn't tell her what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember one day I saw him online. It was back in the days when American Online was around. And I said, you're up, Danny. Why aren't you in bed? And he was like, it's one of those things that you wish you can just clap your hands and it just goes away. And I said, you really, really should go see a professional because if you're afraid this is going to affect your marriage and your family, then you need to do something about it instead of allowing this trauma to overthrow you. And he finally did go see someone, but he lived in that terror and the sense like that guilt of witnessing. And I don't know, I've never asked him, what did he really felt guilty that he did nothing to help save our mother? But he's 5 years old. He doesn't understand how to do that. So his night terrors, I think it's he witnessed his dad doing this to our mother. So I'm wondering if he was also feeling guilty not guilty. I shouldn't use the word guilty. If his terror was because he was afraid his father was going to come after him.
That could be both. It could be feeling a certain responsibility for the situation, like I should have done something, although he couldn't. It can also be indeed that he might have been fearful that if he stood up to his father, he might have been killed too. But that's all second guessing because we're not talking to him now.
I want to go back to something Alexander said. It was about men don't have the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just a part of it. Even if we had a list of words and understood what they meant, we don't have the skill set to be able to actually deliver that and act upon it, how to process that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of shame that comes with men appearing weak.
Yeah.
So we don't know that we can say something and still be okay, still be loved, still be accepted, right? Still appear as like we can still be a part of this community. We think that we're going to be put down upon, which was my experience in my house. You didn't act that way. You can't express yourself. So that shut me down at a very early age. So there's something about the ability to know that you're okay in saying something that would normally make you very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody's listening to this, if this resonates at all, find someone you can talk to that may be completely out of your circle that you can feel comfortable sharing something, whatever that looks like for you.
Right. I always recommend to people, like anyone who's grieving, get yourself a grief buddy. And what I mean by that, the person that can be there with you when you're, when you need someone, right? But also, like Michael was saying, and like as Alexandra was saying, someone that you can speak with openly without feeling judged or invalidated and things like that. I want to give a shout out to one of the people who just posted up here, Daddies with Angels International. Thank you guys for tuning in. And it goes right along with what they said, losing children, parents who lose children, right? And that's a huge thing because you guys are touching on the topic of grieving children as well and how children process these things. And I've also seen it as well with my son's friends after my son passed away. I always paid, there was a time I just paid attention to the adults to see how they would react to me being around. And very seldom do we pay attention to the kids, right? That have lost their dear friend. And so I did start paying attention to that. And so my son's best friend, he used to always tell me, every time I used to see him, he used to come sit up on my lap and just give me a hug. And he would just say, I miss him, right? And I used to always think to myself, when he gets older, he's not even going to remember my son. And so I think that was a part of me that wanted to believe that, which made it easier for me not to go around people because it was the guilty feeling. I have someone else's child in my lap. What would my son think about that? Because, my son is not here. And it was a sense of, I never want to make his friends or anyone else feel uncomfortable. So what I did, I just started avoiding things. And there was a sense of, am I doing the right thing? In the long run, I learned that wasn't that wasn't the best move for me, because everyone was still looking to me for support, so to speak. They wanted to know that I was okay, so they can feel okay. So it was, in the long run, we was going back and forth. I don't want to do this around Tony. I don't want him to feel guilty about this. And in the same sense, I'm looking at this and going, well, I feel guilty because I can't, I don't have the strength to do it right now. But as Michael said, we can have a whole list of words and still not know how to communicate. Men, we communicate to each other totally different than what women think. And I think it takes a man being in that situation to be able to effectively communicate to each other, just like women. I don't take nothing away from women, because I see the way y'all do it, and I get, sometimes I go like this, like, wow, how are they doing this, right? But in the same sense, I respect it because I'm able to do the same thing with men, and we just speak a whole different language, but having people around that understand it.
Yeah, with men it's a lot of, sentence like that. I felt, men don't say.
There was
I
a lot of that.
really devastated, or I felt completely lonely, or they said, that's always, when I talk to men, I always have to, pull the strings a bit to find out what part of I should know.
Well,
because sometimes I just don't know what I had to know.
and that's true. Well, most men, we have a favorite saying. We always tell each other that we are okay.
Yeah.
Now, on the outside looking in, when you say that around other people, they just hear those words. They just hear those, I'm okay. So they blow it off and they keep moving forward. Now, you go around another man who understands that, and he says, okay, we look at each other like, not really.
Yeah.
We don't have to say that. We already instinctively know what that means, right? So it's understanding the language that we speak to each other, and how to help others understand the language that we speak to, how we speak to each other, right? But also that goes into how many languages do we communicate through? The biggest one that we do without guilt is communicate through our love languages. And I spoke about this a lot of times. We can speak verbally, right? But it's the ones that speak to our love language that we can receive that support, but also be able to give it back in that same language, and it's.
You lost sound.
I lost sound?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm back again.
Sorry.
So yeah, anybody want to piggyback off of that?
Yeah, when I was much younger, I saw the Dick Cavett show, an interview with John Lennon from the Beatles, and he went through primal scream therapy. And his song, "Mother, you had me, but I never had you," and it's a sad childhood. I think his mother left when he was a little boy and he was raised by somebody else. And so I was fascinated by this, and I bought the book, The Primal Scream by Arthur Janoff, and he had been the therapist for the great James Earl Jones and the actress Diane Cannon. I thought, this is, wow, what a story. And so I ended up in California and did primal scream therapy. And one of the things that they allowed us to do was they allowed us to come into the therapy center, which was a lot of soundproof rooms, and buddy up. Tony, this is what you were talking about. Find a friend, a grief buddy.
Right.
We literally buddy up, but the instructions were, and people who knew about I think it used to be called co-therapy, sort of similar. The rules were, you two are going to go into the room. There's no therapist there, but just the one person, don't play therapist. Just sit and say nothing. Just sit and listen. You don't play therapist. It's not a conversation. You're listening to your buddy. And then when he or she is through, whether they cry or not, then it's your turn. And to this day, decades later, my friend Sam, was a college teacher and married and has his own life. We get together about every 3 or 4 months when hey Sam, you want a buddy? Yeah, I could really use it, man. And we go into either my basement or his basement when nobody's home, and we got pillows there, and one of us sits on a stool and just shuts up, and the other one goes, man, I don't know, and eventually, often tears will come.
Mm.
As long as you have that agreement. I mean, I know that this is not going to happen with your friend on the bus bench who you see every Monday on the way to work. But that Tony, that's what that's true story, and I thank my lucky stars. When my buddy Sam is not old enough to die yet, but when that happens, I'm gonna have to find another buddy who's willing to let it out and let me let it out. I mean, it's sort of a it's unusual, but I can't tell you how lucky I feel.
Bill, that's not unusual. It's actually not. So the ability to hold space for someone is actually one of the most powerful ways to help someone else heal, as well as to open something for yourself. I do a process similar, but it's usually out in nature, where someone can get their full rage on and maybe turn a big rock into a bunch of little rocks, and release whatever needs to be released in that process. We do a ceremony around it. We say some prayers around it, write some letters, burn things, and let those letters up under the ethers. It's very powerful. It is quite powerful.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. And started so long ago by the poet Robert Bly, the men's movement, which for years I thought, these guys are crazy. They're stripping their clothes off and running around naked in the woods. What are they doing? And I finally went to hear him speak in the Red Iron John, and anybody who's involved in that, it sounds like what you're doing is really fascinating. Mm-hmm. A lot of lucky guys.
Yeah.
Hey, can I ask a question? I kind of want to bring this back to guilt. And Michael, what you said, or anybody else on the panel, have you ever dealt with a situation where you've done something or advised somebody or recommended somebody to do something or done something in your own life, like, smashing rocks, burning something, whatever, some kind of, I don't want to use the word ritual, but some kind of ceremony, if you will, and then had guilt about doing that afterwards? Oh, I did that too soon. I shouldn't have done that.
Yes.
So there's that aspect of guilt.
Yeah, no, I've done it. When I first started working with men, I came up with a program which was very effective, but there were some things that needed to be worked out, and I worked them out eventually. So one of the things that I did, we went on a retreat, and I tell the man at the beginning of the retreat, you have this rock, put it in this bag on your back, and every day, if you're feeling guilty about something, write it down on a piece of paper, put it in the bag. Right? You'd be surprised within the first week how much that bag fills up. And you only started off with this one rock, but now your bag is full. So at the end, we do a grief walk. There's a lake at the place that we were at. And so we go up there and we take the rock and we throw it away. That's all your guilt that you have. And so the bag that you have a hole, you bury it. And I've had most people go back and go, I need to go back in there because I forgot to do something, or I didn't want to put this in there, but they're putting them in at the most rawest moments in their life because now they're thinking, right? And most of these men, when we got some really interesting thoughts when it comes down to it, the things that we do feel guilty over. And it's the process of going through it, of understanding what you're feeling guilty for, right? And then taking that rock and releasing that burden and putting it in the ocean is a way of saying we give it back, and so when you feel in the long run, you realize that these things that you're feeling guilty of is totally normal, right? Most of the people who have lost children, we feel guilty because we wasn't able to protect our child. When we lose parents, we feel guilty when we're not there when they get sick, right? What could I have done differently? Right. So we carry that burden with us. And so that's a great way of us saying, you know what, no longer do I need to feel guilty, and we can focus on the memories that make us happy.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Mark, I have not had a situation where I said, "Oh shoot, I really shouldn't have done that right then." Very fortunate, but it's not something in the coaching that I do that it's not week one stuff.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, and not everybody even wants to participate, and that's totally okay, right? You can't force
There you
someone to
go.
heal. You can hold the door open for them and allow them to step through it.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Rituals are not something, or ceremonies, whatever you want to call them. It's not something you must do or can be pushed in. It's an inspiration. It's something that you can offer someone as an idea, as a
Yes.
concept.
Mhm.
As soon as you say you must do this with me and you have to step over your boundaries, and I know you feel scared, but whatever, you're forcing somebody into an experience where he or she is not ready for.
Agreed.
So, and then the whole meaning of the ritual or the ceremony to be a pivotal moment to change, to transform this person will be gone, because the delicacy of a ritual and the transformation through ritual is that somebody chooses to do that. Oh, I had an orb. Did you see that?
Yep.
Lovely. Must
Yeah.
be my mom. It's her death week this week, 33 years ago. So she's with me.
Yeah.
Mark, to answer your question, I don't think I felt guilty. I think I second guessed myself.
Yeah.
So my son was 7, and I gave him the option when he came home: do you want to go say goodbye to Dad in the hospital, or do you want to remember Dad as you left this morning? And my family was very, very adamant. My brothers and sisters were, do not bring him in there. You can't let him see his dad that way. And I'm like, and I reverted back to, my mom was 17 when I died, or I was, 17 when my mom died. And I was never called to the hospital to have that final goodbye. So I did not want to have him second guess or have any regret at a later life. I wanted to give him that option. 7's really young, but he was a very intelligent kid. I only second guessed myself probably for the first couple days. And then after that, nope, because I knew he was thriving and he was fine, and I made the right decision, and we just transferred the image that he saw. We transferred it onto something else. And now at 17, I said, do you remember what Dad looked like when you went into the hospital? And he said, no, I don't. I remember the image that we replaced it with. But that's a really good question that you posed.
Well, that was huge, Dorothy, because you empowered the hell out of your son in that moment.
I didn't want his first experience to death to be one of, a negative one. I didn't want, I was exposed to a lot of death prior to that. It's just like I didn't want to do a big Catholic funeral either. I gave him the option. I said, what would you like to do? Do you want to have a big party at home? I wanted him to have the option so that as he grew up later, he wouldn't have any regrets, and he wouldn't have any, how come we didn't do this? As a death doula, when I work with people, I tell them you get a second chance at life when you wake up every morning, but you only have one shot at doing death correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you screw that up, you can't go back at it. So regardless of how silly you think it sounds, do it, because you need to make sure that you are, confident in yourself, and what is your life going to look like after that. But it's
Wow. Yeah.
Look, yeah, I agree with Michael. You did your son a huge favor, and my mother and father did exactly the same for me at age 7. My mother was dying of breast cancer. I was 7.5, and my father said, and she was in the hospital in her last week of life. Of course, we didn't know that wasn't said, but my father said, "I'm going to take you to the hospital, and I can't take you in, but I want you to see your mom. And I was suspicious. I thought, wait a minute, why can't I go up and see her? You're too young. They don't let 7-year-olds in the hospital. And even though I'm still to this day suspicious that wasn't true, what he did for me was he said, you stand on the sidewalk right here. I'm going to run into the hospital. And I stood there waiting, and up on the 4th floor appeared my mother with a nurse helping her out of bed. And she waved to me. And it was cold. It was October. It was in Minnesota, so it was cold. There was no open window. There was no hello, how are you? But that vision of my mother, that reality, was the reality. This is a dying woman who needed to be helped out of bed by a younger nurse and wife. And that vision, I certainly have lovely photographs of it, was the reality. And the reality, I could understand that. And and your son understood what you allowed him to see. That's what I think, anyway. And I don't think I don't think it was traumatic. And it's a scene that I go back to and shed tears. But the thing about death that is in a way more complete than abuse is a child can get it. A child can, I don't know if they integrate it fully or if I integrated it fully, probably not, but at least that the reality was something that I comprehended. And you're having what Michael just said, what you did for your son. I agree completely because it was done for me. The reality was presented.
Children are often very natural about death, far more natural than we are.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, very to the point and very down to earth about it. It's very remarkable. I remember the day my father died. My son was 6 then. And we stood in the elevator. I was crying because we knew my father, I'm living in the Netherlands. We have the possibility of palliative sedation and euthanasia. And my father was going into palliative sedation. And my son said to me, "Don't cry, Mama. This is life." He was 6. "Don't cry, Mama. This is life." And I immediately was able to snap out of my drama and think, yes, this is life. And we had such a lovely, special time taking care of my father after he died together. He went with me every day to take care of my father's body and to be able to receive guests, to say goodbye. He was really very into it on a very natural basis. And he had a very good mourning week. I didn't take him to the funeral because I thought that would be too much because some of my siblings weren't that very down to earth and dramaless. So I didn't take him with me, but we did everything. He made a little heart of moss and he put it on my father's chest before we closed the casket. It was a marvelous week. And he was very, very down to earth on it. It was, just remarkable. He grieved so well. I admired him for it.
That kids have the innate ability to just be present and not have to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened yesterday. I mean, I knew we were going to be okay when a half hour later he looks at me and my sister just looked at us askant because he goes, "Well, that was a lot sooner than later, wasn't it?" And I'm like, pretty much, yeah, you're right. You know, we didn't think it would. We thought Dad would be here a lot longer than that. But yeah, they have that, which is cool. The innate ability just to be present and not have to worry about this or that. I was going to bring up one of the things with kids, and then as they get older, and I don't know, Bill, if you went through this, if you felt guilty because you couldn't remember how their voice sounded, I mean, I go through that. I lost, it's been 40 some years since I've lost my mom, and I still get a little, I can't remember what she sounds like,
Yes. That's really interesting. My aunt made a cassette tape of me and my older brother, who was 6 years older. He died when he was 19 of kidney disease. I was 13. And I knew that I had saved this cassette, the old-fashioned audio cassette. And I spent the better part of a year looking for it in my house. I would get obsessed because I wanted to hear my brother's voice. And we're talking about I was a 60-year-old man. And I felt, and finally I gave it up. It's gone, obviously, it's not around. But yeah, and I felt that about my father as well. My stepmother gave away an LP, a 33 1/3 LP, with my father's voice giving a lecture somewhere, some business group, and she gave it away to Goodwill with a bunch of records after he had died, and I did feel guilty. I've tried to remember, I wanted to hear, but I think what it is just that yearning to hear that voice.
Mm-hmm.
And then the guilt is sort of a mask for just the rage to hear that voice again.
It's been a little bit of the years since my mom died. I can picture her and see when she's angry and when she's happy and when she's singing. I just can't hear that voice again. And my uncle was really good at making homemade movies. And I see all these wonderful movies, but back then it didn't have sound with it. So now I'm more thankful that nowadays we have this technology that we can videotape and remember stuff. And now when I want to listen to Timothy's voice, I just go to the CDs or the DVDs or whatever I have, and or whatever I may have on Facebook even, and just go back and listen to his deep, wonderful sense of humor voice that he has, and I just wish that we had that kind of sound from the 50s and 60s so that I can go back, I'm trying to remember, I can picture her. I'm trying to remember, did she still have her Spanish accent? When I listen to my aunts, her sisters, I can hear that hint in them that they have that Spanish accent. And I'm trying to remember, did she also have that Spanish accent? And I'm sure she did, but it's just wanting to hear that voice again.
Mm-hmm.
I think voices bring back memories, and then it brings back a sense of comfort and just you're able to mentally embrace them again.
Yes.
Yeah.
The voice is far more palpable than pictures, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Pictures and videos,
Mm-hmm.
they're still sort of one-dimensional, and the voice is really, it's almost palpable. You can feel it.
Yeah.
Vibrations of a voice are so different than just looking at someone.
So I want to come at that from a little bit of different angle because I agree with all this. My late wife died. It'll be 30 years this spring. She died in 1993. She was 27 or just about to turn 27. I don't look anything like I looked then. I know if she were still alive, she would look nothing like she looks, like the picture I have in my head of a 26-year-old woman who died. But I have her voice in my head, and I know her voice. If I heard her voice in a crowd, I would be able to pick it out in an instant. But I know she wouldn't look the same. So it's this weird dynamic sometimes of, I got older. She didn't get the opportunity to get older. And it's just throwing that out there. And I haven't lost a child. So I assume, and you should never assume, that might be something like, with losing a child, is you don't get to see what they're going to be like as they grow up and as they get older. But I think about that. My wife, she's been gone. I've been grieving her longer than she was alive. Because she died when she was, 26, just about to turn 27, and it'll be 30 years this next spring. So it's just an odd kind of dynamic of my own experience. So.
One thing, I was pretty fortunate. I have a really good friend. He's like my brother. when we both had when he had his son, I have my son. So the crazy part about it is his son looks exactly like mine. You know, they could pass for brothers. They would have been the same age this year, right? Growing up. And I often wonder, you know, had my son had not passed away, what sort of friendship would they have had, right? You know, what sort of bond would they have? So, you know, and I appreciate my brother Mike so much for sharing his son with me. You know, it's like in spurts, right? You know, he's never poured it on me. It was like, oh man, you have to do this. But he and I always had this thing. We was going to grow old and watch our kids have kids, you know, and sit back on the rocking chair and, you know, just watch them play and have grandkids and things like that. When I lost mine, all of that hope went out the window. But when I see his kid, I'm like, man, I wonder if my son would have looked just like him, you know, because they could have passed for twins. They really could have passed for twins. And so that's one of the things I always carry with me, and one of the reasons why I have a hard time being around for the most part, because one, I don't want to ever bring anyone into the world that I live in, right? Of pain and things like that. I wish that on no one. I really don't. And two, you know, it's the guilty feeling of, wow, I always wonder what if, you know, if my son would have been the man that he always told me that he was going to be when he was a child. You know, what sort of preteen-hood would he have had? Would he have been one of those guys that went out there and just brought joy to people's lives? Or, you know, would he have been one of those that, you know, and I'm leaning more towards this one, when he got out of high school, would he have went into the military? You know, because we've always instilled that into each other. You know, our role in this world was to help others that could not help themselves. And so I often think about that. I really do. And it does bring a sense of what if guilt, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, am I okay to assume these things, or, you know, am I totally wrong for doing them? I guess I'll never know, but it's
No, it
it's
doesn't
one of those
matter.
things.
It doesn't matter, because in the end, it's the what ifs is a way of coping with grief too.
Right.
So why would he be wrong? Why make it something not okay? It's okay.
Yeah.
It's
But it's
okay
something-
with what ifs.
Yeah,
Just-
well, it's one of those things I still struggle with, right? You know, with the what ifs, even though I understand it's a learning process. But what's the purpose of not exploring those ideas if I'm afraid to learn from it?
Exactly.
So for me, like I said, most of us will go through grief and experience it in different ways, take it in different ways. My method is I want to learn. You know, so I'm not afraid to ask myself those questions, like what if, you know, what sort of person he would have been, or, you know, how would my mom would have reacted to it, my dad, my younger brother, all these people that have gone before me, right? So it's a combination of those. But I don't, you know, now I'm learning not to feel guilty about asking those questions. It's questions that I want to learn from, to be better, to help the next person. So they don't have to struggle with the idea of it, right?
Mhm.
You know, like Michael said, I don't want to assume anything, or what Mark said, I don't want to assume anything. But in a way, it's okay to assume, long as we're not putting that assumption on other people. We can kind of process it.
It's a way of daydreaming, the what ifs. It's a way of daydreaming, and it's not wrong. It's okay.
I agree
I
with
go
that.
through the same thing, Tony.
Yeah.
You know, what if he didn't have this disease? What if he would have been able to
Right.
finish college, or he wanted to join the military? He wanted to have, he even talked, I mean, I just blew me that he even talked about having 3 kids and 2 of them were going to be twins, and he even had names for them. And what man thinks of stuff like that?
We all
And
do.
that's usually like a female thinking, but he was so hopeful that this disease would cure him and that he can get up and walk again and do all that stuff again and have a family and have a good job. And it's just sad that instead the disease took his life before he had that opportunity, you know?
Right.
I think this is like a really good place to go back to the original topic,
Right.
right? So, I mean, I've got all this stuff like hitting me, like my brother who passed. He's like, no, you got to talk about this. So, I miss him. I miss my brother. I still miss him very, very much. He was my hero. But I know that he wouldn't want me to not live my life, to not celebrate my life moving forward just because he's not here. So the guilt that I used to have of the things that he wasn't able to do when we were younger, he had all kinds of health issues, got paralyzed at 18, blah, blah, blah. Story continues. I always felt guilty about the stuff I could do. I know now that that is not going to serve anybody. So he wants me to be happy. Just because he's not here doesn't mean I still can't be happy.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But that I didn't come to that instantly. Right. This is, I've had to do a lot of work around this. But I know that he loves me and he wants me to enjoy my life, even though he's not here. You know, I can take all these things that he taught me and make myself a better man and enjoy my life even more.
Yeah. I like that. I definitely like that because I do look at the lessons that even though my son was, you know, he was young, he taught me so much, right? And I can revert back to the lessons that he did teach me. He taught me so much, even if he didn't think he did, because you know, being a child, you're just having fun. But they're full of all this information, and I look at his life, as brief as it was. He crammed so much into that short amount of time, right? That the day of his tribute, my son had 200 people show up, and he was nothing but 8 years old. And to me, that's inspiring, right? Because I look at that and I go, wow, at 8 years old, he had all of these people that cared about him, that showed up, that just enjoyed being around him. And I look at my life and I go, I wonder if I can measure up to that. So he inspires me to be that inspiration for other people, right? To serve, but also embrace and receive. You know, all of those things that we take for granted, you know, because we often do. We often do take that time for granted, you know, because we always think that we have forever until forever is all that you have. Right. And and what I mean by that is that when that person is gone, you have forever to think about everything else that they've taught you. Everything, you know, whether it's traumatic or, you know, whether it's wonderful feelings. And then, like you said, Michael, to take those things, internalize it and do something that makes you feel good to where that guilt is not there. What are some of the steps that you guys have taken to alleviate that guilt moving forward in your grief, in your own individual grief journey? And I want to take a minute to encourage people. If you have questions, please, by all means, put them in the comments. We'll be more than happy to answer those as well. So anybody want to start from there?
You know,
For me, I did something in his memory. Because like you said, you know how much your son taught you a lot? That's how much, you know, Timothy also taught me. So I took something and turned it around and did something in his memory.
Okay.
You know, and I keep that alive. So that way people can know him or remember him as that person that funny, smart. He was very smart. I just wish he would have been able to finish college, but he was very smart. And that's the way I want people to remember him, as that smart, funny guy that really knew. And I mean, he didn't even want to tutor me because he knew I was terrible with numbers. So, and that's what makes me laugh every time, because I needed to be tutored to understand algebra. And he's like, no, you're impossible. And I laugh about that every time I think about algebra. My son did not want to teach me because he knew I couldn't get through those numbers. But the way he presented it was so funny. So now I do things in his memory to honor him. So now I don't. So I try not to feel that guilt, to have that guilt overwhelm me. Hope that makes sense.
My answer to that question, Tony, is something happened for me to alleviate the guilt. Decades after I was orphaned, my wife and I had twins. I mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
We had an older daughter who was 8, and twins were born, and we knew from the beginning of the pregnancy that one was very troubled with heart problems. She died at 3 months, but throughout her life, she never left the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit, and we would go every day, and my wife would express milk, and we would hold her every day and sing and so on, and but then we would go home with her healthy twin and be in ecstasy. And I thought, well, why aren't I feeling guilty about this? Why aren't I feeling conflicted?
Mhm.
And it suddenly occurred to me about that question and many others that surfaced with this little girl who's still alive and when she died. And the reason that I didn't feel guilty was because there was not a thing I could do other than show up. And when she died in our arms in the hospital. We literally watched the monitors as the life went out of her. And the nurses were very supportive, and it was and our daughter was there, and she lived through it with us, and it was a pretty complete experience of loss rather than mystery. And we were able somehow to say, my wife said, the gift that she finally gave us was relief from the pain of her life, because she was so damaged. They did surgeries on her. She would have, had she lived, she would have had surgeries every year for the rest of her life. And they did everything. We did everything, and they did everything. And so I thought, this is happening to me. That I realized as an adult, maybe because I lived through what I lived through as a kid, that I can control what I can control, but I can't control what I can't control. There's in 12-step programs, I forget exactly what it is, but Lord, let me control the things I can control and not worry about the things I can't. That actually happened, and I was very, very grateful that my aging male psyche was able to get it. That, look, man, you're doing everything you can, and what's beyond your control is beyond your control.
Anybody want to piggyback off of that? Kind of share your experiences.
To step back to what Michael said, my philosophy is that the ones we live with install their jewels in us. We are a treasure box for their jewels. So all the lessons they learn us, all the love they give us, all the stories they give us, we take on in our box and take that with us on our journey. So in a way, when we proceed with life after their death, we live for two people. We live for ourselves, and we live for them who can't live anymore. So that's how I don't feel guilt. I take with me what they gave me, and I give it to other people. So I create ripples in the pond of life with their stones. And that's how I don't feel guilty, because they are, even after death, they are of so much good influence to other people who never knew them.
Yep.
But because I tell their story, because I give on their wisdom, while I give on the love they gave me, I give it to other people. It creates more ripples in the pond of life.
Someone put a comment up, and it's something that we talked about earlier, about the terminology of guilt. I think Alexander, you talked about it, intention to harm. And she pretty much just suggested be kind to yourself. And we get that, you know what I'm saying? We all work in the field of grief. But when you're talking about guilt, when you're talking about the guilt of grief and things like that, it doesn't necessarily mean harm. It can mean just feeling guilty of or doing something without your loved one being there, and because of the connection that you have. So there's many ways to look at the term guilt, in when you're thinking about bereavement and things like that as well. But being kind to yourself is a huge part of it. You have to be patient with yourself. You have to have something to help you pull back to understand that terminology as well, because many people can say it. We can take it from the book, or we can internalize it and use it as a learning lesson, and add more to it.
I'm not afraid of the word guilt.
Yeah,
If somebody uses that word, it's fine with me. It mostly means responsibility or pain,
mm-hmm.
but it's not a word I fear of used. No. But it is a word if you talk to someone in grief and they use the word guilt or feel guilty, it is a word to encourage to dialogue about, to talk about. What do you mean by that? Why is it you feel like that?
Right. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean that, intention of harm.
No.
It doesn't necessarily have to mean that. There's so many things we could take these things out of the book and dissect them and actually, come up with a whole lot of different definitions of it. Depending on the individual that you're talking to and the situation that you're talking to in, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It doesn't, and I think when we take those things away, we limit what people feel. Yeah. Anybody else want to piggyback off of this?
So, Tony, I want to jump in back to your original question about what have we done for ourselves around guilt, if you will. And for me, my faith is what has sustained me. I mean, I spent many years grieving, but not dealing with my grief. I rest assured where my late wife is. I have no doubt about that. So I've always went, especially as I started to be more intentional about healing, to 2 Corinthians 10:5, where it talks about taking every thought captive. And that's something I've tried to do and I mentioned this in the beginning about some of these thoughts we have are false guilt, could be false guilt. And it's like, so I go, God, what are you trying to tell me here? I'm thinking this, but what are you trying to teach me through this? And trying to realize that the thoughts in my head are not always correct, because we just think whatever we think. And that's been something that's helped me through the years.
What we think is only one narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And there are more narratives, but we can't see them. I love how you put on, I'm an atheist, but I studied theology for 2 years to become a minister, and then I became an atheist. Sorry. But I love the story of Job. It's one of the best books in the Bible. And it teaches us all we need to know about being with someone in grief, and especially also what you can do wrong. And all the emotions of grief are described in that book. So beautifully raw, so basic, so earthy. I love that.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of goes back to the conversation we had earlier about vocabulary. And I know in my own journals, I wrote a lot after my wife died. And I go back to those journals and it's a lot of anger, but I was able to express that anger through journaling, through writing. Did I share those with anybody? No, I did pull a lot of it into my memoir in the last couple of years, but before that, I never shared it with anybody. But, that's the vocabulary men use. It is different than what the vocabulary women use a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
And writing is always such a good tool, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are coming up on time at 6:30. I want to take some time to give each and every last one of you to tell people where they can find you, and whatever else you got going on. So if we want to take the time to do that, by all means. Alexandra?
Oh, yeah, that's okay. You can find me on Facebook. www.facebook.com/alexandramaas.com. No, sorry, alexandramaas.com, no dot. And I'm having a Grief in the Holidays program the coming 6 weeks. If you want to join, find me on that page and I will give you more information there.
Dee?
Yeah, I'm also on Facebook, Unplugged Grief Consultants. And I'm about ready to do a workshop in January on When Children Grieve. I think Dorothy's going to be on there with me as well. And I also have a website, unpluggedgrief.org. Join me there.
Awesome. Dorothy?
So we're on Facebook as well, WWDSD Inc. Our website is worldwidedragonshootingday.com. Check there for, I host death cafes and we do grief sessions where we're working with different arts centers and also libraries. And we've got little miniature Dragon Slayer kits. So these are what we do in real life to raise money for adults and children affected by grief or trauma. But check us out there. We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram. And thank you for being here tonight.
Awesome. Mark?
Hey, I guess the best way to get a hold of me is probably through my website. It's markshutter.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the social media channels, either some variation of my name, either Mark Wayne or Mark Shutter. You can find me there. Always information about my coaching and support I offer and any upcoming events. And if there's any way, I think I speak for everybody on the panel. If there's any way we can help any of you out there that may be listening, please hit us up. That's what we're here for. And that's what we desire to do.
Yep. Michael?
All right. I can be found at www.dogsandmen.com. It'll take you to a link tree with a whole ton of podcasts and shows. I actually have my own podcast. There's a link to that in there. And PDF versions of my books for free.
Awesome. Bill?
I'm at billratner.com/author and Amazon.com and all the other crazy, silly social media outlets.
Yeah.
And I am Tony Lynch. I am the founder of Memories of Us. So I do offer grief support to men. And I'm also the host of Memories of Us podcast. So if you guys enjoy stories of loss and grief, go by, check us out. Check us out on any of your favorite platforms as far as audio. And also you can find me on Facebook. And with that being said, you guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing us to come in here and talk about these things. And until next time, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks with another great topic, another live panel. Be sure to drop us a comment, tell us what you think. With that being said, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
It
everyone.
was a wonderful session.
Thank you so much, all.